going to be talking about what a sinner learned after death. But I want to start with a true story. I have a preaching friend in Tennessee who was doing a gospel meeting in Tennessee at a smaller country congregation. And he related this story to me and to others as well. That here in this particular meeting, there was a couple, father and mother, who had two children there, teenagers, and they were very worried about their sons. The boys were quite wild. They were restless. They were very much into the party atmosphere, and they did not respect authority. They could be quite dismissive towards those that would seek to try to corral them in. And this particular preacher holding this meeting, he was asked by the parents if he might consider talking to the sons. And so at the close out of the meeting, he went ahead and he did that. And there in the foyer, tried to spark up a conversation with them. And one of the two was a little more outspoken. He quickly picked up on where it was that the conversation was headed. And he did not care for it. So he said, preacher, how far is it to hell? And he and the brother left, exiting out the doors. Well, before everybody had even fully left the premises, the parking lot, there was a patrol car to pull on up, and an officer stepped out. And he asked if those there happened to know these two young men. They nodded their heads. He said, well, I have some very tragic news to share. Evidently, they were going pretty fast, lost control of the car, hit a tree, and they're dead. As you might imagine, that made quite an impression on everyone there. But in particular, with this gospel meeting preacher, who shares the story today. Oh yes, he was shaken by it. But he thought long and hard about that very question. How far is it to hell? And he concluded that potentially you could say, in the case of these two young men, just about 2 miles away. But that's where the accident had happened. That's a true story. Now we're going to be talking about what a sinner learned after death. And I freely do grant that this is not the most popular of subjects at all. We know that beautiful number when we all get to heaven, but we also understand the grim reality behind all of this, that the way is narrow that leads to life, and few there be who find it. We do not want to be among the majority heading there on the broad way that leads to destruction. And let us ever keep in mind that no one, and I mean no one, spoke more about the subject of hell than Jesus Christ, the loving Savior. In point of fact, it's estimated that he spoke about hell roughly 3 times as much as he did heaven. And you could search out the Bible there from Genesis to Revelation. You're going to find that Jesus talks about it the most. And Jesus, being the Son of God, understood that this was a reality, that this happened to be an actuality. And he loved mankind enough to warn us all about that, so that we not go to that place of eternal torment. Using indeed very vivid language. This is as real as it gets. And all that's toward the end. We might think very critically about the choices that we are making in life. We might choose to serve God, choose to please Him, and rise above selfish pursuits and desires. Now, we're going to be looking at the well-known narrative of the rich man and Lazarus, found in Luke's Gospel in the 16th chapter. So I invite you to turn over to Luke chapter 16. We consider this subject of what a sinner learned after death. And I'd like to go ahead and read through this here in its entirety, and then we'll return back there to the beginning to make some observations and share some commentary and draw out a few points here for our consideration. In Luke chapter 16, let's commence with verse 19. Here the record says, "There was a certain rich man who was clothed in purple and fine linen, and fared sumptuously every day. But there was a certain beggar named Lazarus, full of sores, who was laid at his gate, desiring to be fed with the crumbs which fell from the rich man's table. Moreover, the dogs came and licked his sores. So it was that the beggar died, and was carried by the angels to Abraham's bosom. The rich man also died and was buried. And being in torments in Hades, he lifted up his eyes and saw Abraham afar off, and Lazarus in his bosom. Then he cried and said, Father Abraham, have mercy on me, and send Lazarus that he may dip the tip of his finger in water, and cool my tongue, for I am tormented in this flame. But Abraham said, Son, remember that in your lifetime you received your good things, and likewise Lazarus evil things. But now he is comforted, and you are tormented. And besides all this, between us and you there is a great gulf fixed, so that those who want to pass from here to you cannot, nor can those from there pass to us. Then he said, I beg you therefore, Father, that you would send him to my father's house. For I have 5 brothers, that he may testify to them, lest they also come to this place of torment. Abraham said to him, They have Moses and the prophets. Let them hear them. And he said, No, Father Abraham, but if one goes to them from the dead, they will repent. But he said to him, If they do not hear Moses and the prophets, neither will they be persuaded though one rise from the dead. You look here at this telling, and yes, it grabs our attention. Unforgiving. Here you have this scene. A picture here of contrasts. On the one hand, there is this rich man who is clothed in the vestures of purple and fine linen. Very expensive and costly clothing. And we're also told here that he fared sumptuously, how often? Every day, each day that went by on the calendar. Why? He had plenty to pack away. That word sumptuously means luxuriously. And see, we can think here about our general practice, and if it might be that there is a particular job that at long last you've been able to accomplish, and you feel a measure of high esteem because of that, you might say, let's get everybody together now. We're going to go out to eat. We're going to go out there on the town, and we're going to eat very nice. Maybe it is a raise that you get there on the job, or maybe we're talking about a promotion. So you're climbing there a bit the ladder. Or we can even think there about other special occasions, say like birthdays or anniversaries. How about holidays? We might say we're going to round everybody up together and we're going to go and fare sumptuously there on the town. But here was one who did this each and every day. Now, on the other side of the spectrum, you have the poor, helpless, beggar Lazarus. Oh, so hungry. Desiring just crumbs. And doubtless suffering from malnutrition. For that's what the body of sores would most likely indicate. And one might be reasoning that, well, at least he happened to have some Dogs out there come and lick his sores so as to soothe him and to quench the pain. Might I suggest that these particular dogs could well have been the hounds of the streets, the curs that were out there, very often with tongues of sandpaper. It could well have been a torturous lick, as they would treat him like a lollipop in the candy shop. But whatever the situation there, with the bigger picture here, as it was in life, so it would be reversed in death. From torture to comfort for Lazarus, and from comfort to torture for the rich man. I don't know if you picked up on these type of contrasts before, but think about it here a little like this. The rich man became as the beggar. The poor man became as the rich man in paradise. The rich man was clothed in purple, but then he finds that he is clothed in robes of fire. The poor man was attended by dogs, but now he's attended by the angels. The rich man fared sumptuously each and every day, but now he cannot get so much as a single drop of water to ease his anguish there on his tongue. We want to make sure that these contrasts are not lost on us. And we're going to learn here from this. When I consider, in the first place, what a sinner learned after death, I see unmistakably that he recognized then that earthly status is nothing. Fame and fortune, it might come your way, but guess what? It shall also leave you at the last. Death is universal. It comes to everybody. That rich man here might have been awarded with accolades in his day. He might have gone to some prestigious university. He might have been particularly educated. He could have been quite the entrepreneur and businessman. He could have wielded political power and influence. We're not told the details there. Or he could have just plumb inherited all of the wealth that he came to possess. Whatever the specifics, Jesus is clear to say that he was rich when it came to this world's goods. A wealthy man, and yet for all of his worth, all of that net worth there, on the cover of Forbes magazine or there with the Fortune 500, with all of that there, he could not buy freedom from death. Death is the high cost of living, and it is the cost for all living. We might remember that slogan that was at one time quite popular, that he who dies with the most toys wins. But I like how I heard that counter. He who dies with the most toys still dies. Regardless if one is President of the United States, or if they happen to be as a wee lad there, shining shoes there at the mall. Mortality is what we all will share. Mortality is what we all have in common. It reminds me of an Italian proverb that I once heard. At the end of the chess game, the king and the pawn both go back into the box. I want for you to turn over to 1 John chapter 2. 1 John chapter 2. Let's read here with verse 15. A well-known passage. 1 John chapter 2, verse 15. Here John tells us about how it is that we need to value what is right, what is sensible. That we make the proper decisions with respect to the foundation of our soul. He says here in 1 John chapter 2, verse 15, do not love the world or the things in the world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. In other words, love for God is just going to be drowned out. You cannot have it both ways. You cannot have one foot in the door with God and then the other foot there anchored. with respect to this present world. For all that is in the world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life is not of the Father, but is of the world. And the world is passing away, and the lust of it. But he who does the will of God abides forever. I want that which is lasting. How about you? I trust that you do. But you see, where your treasure is, there your heart shall be also. So day by day, what are you living for? Do people know that you are a child of God? Do they know that you are a Christian? Are you eagerly seeking opportunities to steer people in the right direction? Extending a word of kindness where you can. But always being mindful of how God in providence brings occasions our way, scenarios to you and to me, wherein we are tested. We are tested. If we will make the right step of talking to others about the truth. My grandfather was a migrant worker in Texas. He actually started out first there as a fisherman in Corpus Christi. But seasonally, he would do migrant work all over the state of Texas. And he himself had actually come up from Mexico, legally. But my mother would often tell me stories about him since he was not very good with English. And in growing up, I would get there together with him, but I would not know how to communicate all that well. And Mom passed on this particular story here. She said that back in those days when he was doing the migrant work, he could distinctly recall hearing from some of the co-workers about a particular landlady who was very wealthy. And she developed a bit of a reputation with an expression that she would use. It went to her a little like this. Ah, los ricos, gloria aquí y gloria ahí. Los pobres, infierno aquí, infierno allí. And what does all that say? Translation, please. She was saying, ah, the rich, glory here and glory over there. The poor, hell over here and hell over there. As she would observe the hard laborers there in the field. With all due respect, I don't quite know what she was reading. It certainly does not seem to be the Bible at all. Certainly she was not familiar here with Luke chapter 16, was she? But if we have it within our mind that we can just somehow buy God off, we are woefully mistaken. God is not for sale that way. No one can say that they have just here purchased monetarily their heaven insurance. I've always been able to afford insurance. I've got health insurance. I've got housing insurance and car insurance. And so I'm just going to go ahead and buy my heaven insurance, my afterlife insurance here. It does not work that way. The Bible tells us in Proverbs chapter 23, verse 5, Proverbs 23, verse 5, that money makes itself wings and flies away. Listen here to the wise man. This tells us where it is that we should be placing our focus. It is not upon that which is just transitory, that which is fleeting. But here he says it, Proverbs chapter 23, there in verse 5. Will you set your eyes on that which is not? In other words, it's not going to continue. It shall not abide. For riches certainly make themselves wings. They fly away like an eagle toward heaven. But what is also of interest is that we also fly away too. Who doesn't like or appreciate that song, I'll fly away? And the psalmist says in Psalm 90, there in verse 10, that we do indeed fly away. But money will fly, and we shall fly. But this is now two different destinations and two different locations that we are talking about. Earthly status is nothing. It is only what we do with our gifts, what we do with what the Lord has increased us with. that shall determine our destiny in the great beyond. In James chapter 1, there in verse 9, here this particular warning is issued. And let it sink here into our heart. He says this now in James chapter 1, there in verse 9, let the lowly brother glory in his exaltation, but the rich in his humiliation, because as a flower of the field he will pass away. For no sooner has the sun risen with a burning heat than it withers the grass. Its flower falls, and its beautiful appearance perishes. So the rich man also will fade away in his pursuits. When you go into the casket, that's what you are. Just a frame, a shell. And we're all equal in death that way. And so you see, the highest height that the rich might attain to is also going to be paralleled by a great fall as well. It is not a sin to be rich, but we have to make sure that we are not possessed by our possessions to the neglect of the giver. But rather we have to use our goods for the glory of God. In the second place, I also see that the sinner learned that he was in agony in that flame. Pain just resounds and abounds in his words. He is in anguish and regret. Eternal regret is ever before him. Just as you study out the conversation that he has here with Abraham, this is really quite noteworthy. At death, one is still conscious. You see, he had sight. He can see, verse 23. He had recognition, verse 23. He knew that he was talking over here with Abraham. He could spot Lazarus. He had cognition. He could cry and plead, verse 24. He felt pain, verse 24. He could reason and debate. He could remember, verse 25. Oh, he had the memory. You see, he was very much alive and yet just wishing so desperately that he was just non-existent. When I was younger, my immune system was a little odd. I'm doing much better now today, but in my earlier years, those formative years, I was highly allergic. And if I just brushed up against some poison oak or sumac, poison ivy, I could break out all over. Technically, I don't think I even really had to touch it. If I was just somewhat close, I could get a bit of an outbreak. Or even if, say, like a mosquito would take a nibble on me. I mean, I would get these big welts, and they always seem to love me best. I mean, if you had just one mosquito here, within the whole congregation, he's going to find me out. For sure would. And I can remember that there was one time where I just got a whole host of bugs at the same time. I mean, just sickness, illness, the flu, fever. And I told my mother, I said, Mom, I know this may not sound so good, but if life were like this each and every day, I don't know that I really want to continue to be here like this. That was very hard for Mom to hear. And I'm not saying that I was looking at all of that the proper way, but you got to now picture a younger man, right? Yet it also hasten to say that about all of us, as we look back on our own time in being here in this world, can probably pinpoint certain occasions where it just got so bad, where the onslaught was just nearly unstoppable, and the pain was so severe and intense and excruciating and ruthless and searing that we despaired even of life. But we also understood that just as bad as it was getting, guess what? In time to come, it would also pass away. One of the awful, ugly realities of heaven is that the horrendous suffering continues on and on and on into eternity. And the rich man at the time of Christ is still experiencing a world of hurt even today. I mean, just look at this here. He's saying, I'm not even asking here for a waterfall or for a fire hydrant with a fire hose. I'm not even asking here for a bucket to just plunge here upon my head and just be doused. I just want but a dip of the tip of the finger in water to cool my tongue. He's just on bended knee, so to speak. If you could even just get momentary relief. I see also, in the third place, that what a sinner learned after death is that death is permanent. There are no do-overs here. There's no second chance now. No waiting in line on clouds. No taking a number to talk to, quote, St. Peter there at the gates to find out if you can check in or if you're going to be checking out. That's not in here at all. His transition to torment was instant, and it was fixed, settled. That word gulf there is from the Greek cosma, from which we get the word chasm. It is a gorge. It's a great abyss with no bridge. That word fixed is the word sterizo in the Greek, from which you would also have the word sterilized. You get the picture. This is firmly established. It's a fixture. How contrary this is to some major religious beliefs and doctrines out there. You see, within Mormonism, you have the notion that we are all as gods. And let's just say you do not become a Mormon, they've got you covered in the end because someone can get baptized after your decease, and then you'll be all right, according to their teaching. And they believe that you progress in your godhood to the degree that eventually you have your own planet and you can have your own people. The Bible does not teach that. We see how contrary the teaching of Christ is here with, say, Roman Catholicism and the well-known doctrine of purgatory, where one is alleged to be purged of their sins and then they continue to push on upward in the afterlife, just migrating. The elevator goes up. No, that's not going to happen. How contrary this is to the doctrine of the Jehovah's Witnesses, where they would advocate the annihilation of the soul, the extermination of the soul of those who are unrighteous. No. He's very much in pain. And how contrary this is to all the Eastern religions which would advocate reincarnation. Hinduism, Buddhism. This rich man could have just wished that he would come back as, say, some teeny-weeny amoeba on a petri dish in some laboratory somewhere. But that would not be his fate. I want you just for a moment now to picture here this center island as a great gulf. And those from this side can look over to those on this side. And those on this side, vice versa, looking over to there. Can you imagine being separated for all eternity? Ladies and gentlemen, we want to be on the right side. The side of the blessed. We want to be able to hear, "Come, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world." For you followed after God and His teaching. a sinner learned after death. I see that he also learned, number 4, that misery loves no company. Now, we often hear that the other way, don't we? That misery loves company. What do we mean by that? We are generally suggesting that people who are unhappy can often find a measure of consolation in knowing that others are also unhappy too. But this man does not want anyone else to join him in his now eternal abiding place. Oh no, not at all. You see, he says, I have 5 brothers. I need them to be warned, lest they come to this place over here. Now he's hurting, the likes of which we can't begin to comprehend. But he says, I want them as far away as possible. You know, one of the greatest hang-ups that is faced in doing evangelism is when we try to convince others of the simple plan of salvation, and then they hesitate and they back off. Why? Because they recognize that is not what tradition has been done there. With who? With their own family. I remember having a conversation with one, and he could see it. Oh yes, baptism is essential. Mark 16:16, Acts 2:38. Oh yes, it's right there. But then he backed off and he said, if I believed it like that, and if I obeyed that, and if I started to teach it just like it is right here like that, then I'd be condemning my father and my mother, and I can't do that. I can't do that. You heard people talk that way? We actually hear that about all the time, don't we? But you see, as we study this out, what we realize is that whether our ancestors are in the better place or the worse, guess what? They always, but always, but always want us to do what is right and obey the truth. Listen here to the one who is speaking from the beyond. He says, while they're in the flame, you do not want to come here and join me. And those who are in the better place would definitely want us to join them there. So we have to open our eyes to that greater reality. I fully recognize that this is highly sensitive. That this is where emotions can run off the chart. But ladies and gentlemen, as we've already pointed out, the way is narrow that leads to life. And so you see, with respect to those that end up being lost, they happen to be someone's brother. They happen to be someone's sister. They are someone's father or mother or son or daughter. But the good news for us here is that they always want us to do what is right. And our attitude and mindset should ever be that we want to live for the Lord and die in the church that the Lord died to establish. Not necessarily the church that our father or mother died in. Let your faith be your own as you study out the Word of God. And do what is right, because God in heaven above has said that this is right. I see also now, in the last place, number 5. What a sinner learned after death is that the Scriptures are sufficient. Now, what is rather intriguing to me about all of this is that the Lord had actually raised 2 others before. Just as you look there at a chronology of the life of Christ. Jairus' daughter, and also a widow's son. And one was still yet to be. Do you know who that was? Ironically, as it turns out, one by the name of Lazarus in John chapter 11. That name Lazarus, by the way, meant God is my helper. And in both cases here, you see how God helps. Luke 16 or even there with John 11. The rich man's response here is admittedly to be sympathized with, but Abraham's response cuts to the heart. Now here on the one hand, the rich man says, "No, Father Abraham, but if one goes to them from the dead, they will be remorseful. They'll get it all straightened out." Abraham answers, "If they do not hear Moses and the prophets, neither will they be persuaded though one rise from the dead." Now it's easy for us to say, well, I don't know about all that there. I think actually if someone would actually push through the soil there at the cemetery and come on out, well, I'm sure that everybody would be a believer then. Dear ones, Lazarus was called forth from the grave, and they sought to kill him. Jesus conquered the grave, and people still do not believe. What Jesus is getting at is this. If one is not going to accept the testimony of God which comes from on high, and the evidence is certainly there to show forth that this is His Word to us today, then there is no grand spectacle in the sky. There is no shaking of the earth. There is no miraculous supernatural sign that will be able to ever do the job of convicting the wayward. For we have here within our hands all things that pertain to life and to godliness. The gospel is the power of God to salvation. Romans chapter 1 verse 16. But is it not remarkable that human ingenuity today has designed a good number of ways to try to draw men? Someone said that the early church prayed in the upper room. The 21st century church cooks in the supper room. And we see all kinds of theatrics and gimmicks that various churches can resort to today. We're told that we need to appeal to the social man in order to be able to garner interest. And so there are education ministries, there are youth ministries, and even aerobic ministries. Dear ones, this is not the answer. What will it be? Will we believe in the all-sufficiency of the Scriptures to convert the soul? Or are we going to resort to seeking to produce another power for drawing? The rich man learned too late what all of us have to learn. And that is that the Bible is enough to convert the lost. Turn over to Psalm 19. Psalm 19. And let's also, as we're doing this here, be fully aware that actually the rich man would have possessed this particular psalm. Here he could have read this again and again or heard the reading of it. Psalm 19 there in verse 7. The law of the Lord is perfect, converting the soul. The testimony of the Lord is sure, making wise the simple. The statutes of the Lord are right, rejoicing the heart. The commandment of the Lord is pure, enlightening the eyes. The fear of the Lord is clean, enduring forever. The judgments of the Lord are true and righteous altogether. More to be desired are they than gold, yea, than much fine gold. Sweeter also than honey and the honeycomb. But let your gaze go right to verse 11. Moreover, by them your servant is what? By them your servant is warned. And in keeping them there is great reward. What had been the worry of the rich man in torment? What was he so anxious about? My 5 brothers need a warning. What did we just read? The Word of God already furnishes that. What I find very impressive about a lot of this is that there are other cases where mercy was appealed for and mercy was given right then and there on the spot. In fact, if you just go from Luke 16 over to the 18th chapter, you have one such example. In Luke chapter 18, there's a blind man who is given eyesight. And it says here in Luke chapter 18, it happened, verse 35, as he was coming near Jericho, there was a certain blind man sat by the road begging. And hearing a multitude passing by, he asked what it meant. So they told him that Jesus of Nazareth was passing by. And he cried out, saying, Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me. Son of David, verse 39, have mercy on me. Verse 41, what do you want me to do for you? He said, Lord, that I might receive my sight. Then Jesus said to him, receive your sight. Your faith has made you well. He asked for mercy, and guess what? He got it. But as we study out that rich man of Luke 16, he's begging for mercy. But mercy is not to be forthcoming. And why? Remember that in your lifetime, you received your good, Lazarus the bad. You had your lifetime. You waited until it had run out. Now is the accepted time. Today is the day of salvation. Do not put that off. God is at work through His Word to penetrate your heart of stone, to take it out, to give you a heart of flesh. Let Him be at work that way. Day after day, that rich man saw Lazarus there laid at the gate. Day after day, he could have done something. But now, in eternity, oh, he wants the help of Lazarus. And no help can be had. Let's make sure that we use our opportunities here and now to glorify God by our good deeds, seeking to be obedient to the gospel of Christ, so that we will be able to hear one day, well done, good and faithful servant, enter into the joy of your Lord. Closing out, I want to go ahead and share, if I might, just briefly, a little pamphlet here. The title of this is Teenagers Talk, Wild Oats and Harvest. And it depicts the illustration here of a girl who, in her teenage years, was living it up, enjoying just the good life, getting quite careless and irresponsible. And she dies. What does she see? What does she hear? What does she witness? Everyone became silent. I began to shake violently, and by then I was wet with a cold sweat. The voice spoke, this time like thunder, "Depart from me, ye cursed, into the eternal fire which is prepared for the devil and his angels." I fell upon my face and began to claw and bite myself, and I screamed again and again, "Have mercy, O my God! I love thee! Have mercy!" Two men clothed in white, with eyes like fire, came to me. They took my arms and lifted me up. I was still screaming. I turned and looked at my family. How wretched I was. The men led me to the left side. I couldn't cry, I couldn't scream. I just stood there among the thousands. And as I stood there in the midst of the weeping, cursing, biting, screaming mob, I began to think of all the opportunities I had in life that could have put me on the right side, the blessed side. And I too began to cry. After a while, some of the men in white clothes opened two doors from the bottom of the cloud. All of us on the left side were herded like cattle through the two doors down a great ramp. There we stood in a black pit. We all pushed and squeezed to get as close as we could to the ramp so that we could get a last look at the pure light. A sudden hush fell on the ocean of people. Every muscle in my body tensed, and again I was shaking uncontrollably. In the opening at the top of the ramp was God's face. It was brighter than the light of a million furnaces, and it glowed with love. We stood spellbound. And then, horror of horrors, climax of all tortures, God turned His face away. Then the great doors were shut, and all was darkness. The multitude wailed a wail that shook the very foundations of hell. Then with one great explosion, the fires of hell were ignited. The fire, the brimstone, and the mental anguish were fused inseparably into this hellish nightmare. But it is no nightmare. I call on God to relieve my pain, but there is no God here. He turned His face away. And I remember, oh, only if I could just not remember. I remember my life and all the opportunities I had to do good. I remember the better upbringing that I had. And I remember the day of judgment, that fateful day when I was sent to this place of torment. That was yesterday. Or was it today? Or was it 10,000 years ago? There's no time here. Only misery. Oh, only if God would say to me, burn in hell one day and then come to heaven and join the blessed. Or if He would say, burn 1,000,000 years and then join the loved and the blessed. Oh, only if there was an end to this torment. Oh God, oh Satan, I implore you, let this body be consumed. Let my soul be disintegrated. Oh, only if these everlasting worms would just quit eating away at my body for 1 minute. I bite and claw at myself, but no blood comes forth. I curse and scream, but to no avail. I pray, but God does not hear me. Oh, my wretched soul. Why, oh why, did my life have to end when I was so young? I was only sowing my wild oats. It's a wake-up call. Now, that leaves quite an indelible mark on all of our minds. But here's what I want for us to consider. That story does not have to be yours. Jesus Christ paid the price. He endured hell on earth so that we could avoid hell in the afterlife. And so we do not want to spurn that invitation because it comes directly from Him. He gave His all when He did not have to, so that we could escape condemnation and destruction and reign with Him eternally in the afterlife. Let that be your story. Obey the gospel of Christ. Believe in Jesus as the Son of God. Repent of your sins. Confess Christ before men. He will confess you before His Father and the holy angels. And be immersed in water for the remission of your sins. Raised to walk in newness of life. We might help you toward that end. Please come to the front. We'll stand.